Welcome to this past paper question for the Anglo Saxon GCSE. This one is describing one feature of the Saxon social system and that hierarchy. So, as with all feature questions, we like to give a feature first, so a nice generalized feature about the topic, and then make sure that your second sentence and third sentence are going to be a supporting fact or statement that back up that feature and give more information about it. So what could you include in an answer that talks about the social system? Well, let's quickly revise the social system. If you remember, the king sat at the very top of the social hierarchy, followed by his number of earls. Sometimes there were anywhere between 7 and 9 earls at any time, who had huge pieces of land like Wessex and Northumbria, Mercia. Then you had the thanes, your fighting men. These were large landowners. And then you had ceorls and peasants, the two different types of peasants. Obviously, ceorls were able to roam the land. They were like free men. They could move around and get money for any work that they could find, whereas peasants were bound to the land and their lord and often had very little rights. And at the very bottom of society, about 10% of the population were your slaves. So you remember that hopefully from your lessons. This is what we're being asked to give a feature about. So what could you then include in an answer? Well, there's lots of different features you could think about. You could discuss one group in particular and what their life was like. I've come up with a few options. So the first one I've come up with is we know that there was a clear social order. So the fact is that we know a feature of the social system is it was structured. And you could also say, we also know that slavery was accepted. And we know that's very different from Norman England, where they didn't accept slavery. So that's another feature, is that they had slavery. And we can also say that most people in the country, probably sort of 90% or more, were peasant farmers. So let's have a look at the first one. What is this clear structure? What could I put for that? Well, I could say that the king is at the top, and then he gets his earls and his thanes, and at the very bottom we've got peasants and slaves. So all I'm doing is saying one feature is that there's a clear structure, and for example, here is the structure. We could also do the second one if we wanted. We could say that slavery was accepted, and some additional facts about that are that we know that around 10% were slaves, and we know that they were completely under their lord's service and were bound to it. But we also know that slaves could also buy their freedom if they saved money. So that was something that was interesting. If you choose to talk about the fact that there were lots of peasant farmers, you could say that they had small farms where they rented them off the lord and worked the land themselves for their families, but they would also have to do a certain number of labour days for their lord in order to compensate them. If they didn't, they would lose the land. And we also know that there were two different types of peasants. We've got the ones that were free and the ones that had zero mobility. So there's lots of things about peasants, and I suppose with that last one you could do thanes, you could do anything with that one. You could do the earls. So I've put 3 up there. If you want to do your own one, that's fine, from your revision notes and from the notes you made in class. But really the 3 are there for you to do and to practice. So have a go at those and pause and write your answer now in about 4 to 5 minutes. Okay, so I've chosen for my exemplar to use the one on clear social structure. I think that's quite a nice, easy one, because we can just say that there's a structure and then we can just say what that structure is and we get our 2 marks. So here's what I did. I said one feature of Anglo-Saxon society was there was a clearly designed structure where people fitted into certain roles. For example, the king was at the very top of society and was followed closely by the rich earls and the wealthy thanes, while at the bottom of society were the peasants and slaves who had very little power or rights. There we are. That's it. I've given a feature, I've said that there's a structure, and then I've just given some supporting evidence and given some examples of how that structure looked. And that's our 2 marks. And hopefully you follow that and you give whatever one you did, you give your feature and you give your supporting fact. And remember to separate them out. You don't have to put a line between them, but it's good to have them as separate sentences to clearly define what's a feature and what is the facts. And I hope that's helped. Good luck with the rest of the questions if you do any more practice.